Kyle Klingman with Track Wrestling. We have Tonya Verbeek, three-time Olympic medalist, three-time world medalist, and she is the head coach for Canada of the men's and women's wrestling national team. How are you, Tonya?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You started way back at age 11. Where was women's wrestling when you started as far as just the acceptance in Canada?
hmm So it was actually grade 11, so I was 16 years old. Started in high school program. Dave Colley, my high school coach, he welcomed the women to come and join and or try it out. It was kind of probably something for him that was very new and unique. And other teams were starting to also include women, and so he introduced that to our high school program back in 1992, I believe. The West Coast had already started some programs there in the late 80s. And so kind of, took some time. And then within my region, it then started like increasing more and more. Actually, Marty Calder's high school coach and like an area coach here in Niagara, Bill Smith. He was really pushing women's wrestling in the area. So then it started increasing quite quickly. So yeah, it was, I was hooked after a month. I was like asking my high school coach, can I please go to the competition with the men? And he said, no, like, I think you need more time to practice. And, but I ended up finding a way. And I ended up getting on that first tournament on my own. It was just by myself. And I had a great tournament. It was awesome. So from there on in, I was just hooked and wanted to explore the sport more.
What'd you like about it right away? Did it just fit your personality?
Yeah, at first I thought, okay, I'm kind of a feisty teenager, an outlet for me, but also just because I loved playing sports and I liked trying things that could be different or that were perceived, maybe as not as normal for a girl at that time. So, it was just a challenge, like, let's just try it and see where it goes. And but interestingly enough, that wasn't what really drove me from the beginning. Like, I enjoyed the technical elements, like the focus points that you had to have, and of course, like the physicality as well. Like, when you ended up getting to scrimmage and actually wrestle. But yeah, and I also loved the discipline, right from the start. My coach was very structured. He was like, you were 1 minute late, he called you on it. Like, as much as you don't like that as a teenager, I think it was very good for me. It kept me, in line and having something to like strive for every day. I was trying to balance all different sports at the same time. So, eventually I had to prioritize, which again is important too, right? So yeah, it was all around challenging for me, and I just loved it right from the start.
What were the outlets at that time? Because women's wrestling wasn't in the Olympics until 2004. You were the first medalist for Canada at the Olympics in '04. But what kind of outlets did you have at that time when you first started out?
Yeah, like in terms of how to deal with that, or what do you?
Just competition outlets. Like, where did you go to seek competition? If it was still in those early stages, where did you seek competition? What were the outlets for that?
Yeah, well, actually, I attended my first senior world championships in 1995, and that was in Moscow, Russia. So that was only 2 years after I started. I ended up making the team, and at that time, they didn't have age group world championships, and so I came in kind of at a pretty good time in terms of like the world level. It was very new for me just to like even travel with the team and such. So like I had very little experience internationally at that time. But we had a lot of high school tournaments that were provided for us at the start. And, it kind of gradually kept expanding and then became more involved at the school level and being sanctioned. It took some time. It actually was when I graduated, so 3 years in, that it became sanctioned at the high school level. And then, with the national level, it was already. So we were very fortunate in Canada how quickly, the teams and the clubs like got on board, like, to be honest, because we were just integrated with the men in terms of practice. So you had all the same coaches that were delivering the programs for the men as the women, and then just including the women. So there was a lot of adjustment period in that time, but typically we definitely didn't have the same amount of competitions that were offered as the men, but slowly, just like you could pick away. And I remember going, so in my first year university, into Arizona for the Sunkiss tournament. That was great. And we ended up going to the NYC, very early on, where they were just introducing the women's, and they didn't really have weight classes at that time because we didn't have enough. We kind of just combined weight classes because we didn't have enough participants. But, just slowly, gradually, step by step, it became more and more, there were more and more opportunities that were offered. So
2004 was a great opportunity. You got to go to the Olympics. Do you remember what it was like having women's freestyle wrestling for the first time at the 2004 Olympics in Athens?
Yeah, like a lot of it is a little bit of a blur for me to some extent, because that year I made the national team, it for the first time since my 1995 team. So, that was 8 years that it took me to get to the national, like the number one position in my weight class in my country. So that was a huge stepping stone for me. I had competed at the international level, and I did okay. I would say, and I had some experience against like Tina George, the American there, trained with her, competed against her. And so in 2004, when that came about, like it was just such a amazing opportunity that like sometimes you just get so tunnel vision, and but yeah, there were 4 weight classes, and we had the 12 athletes that were qualified per weight class. So I think it was interesting. Like I will say there were a few things that you try not to pay attention to distractions, and you try to stay focused, and worry about like the tournament and such. But I remember the one day we ended up, women's wrestling was on the front of like the Athens news, like front page of for the Olympics, and it was actually it was with one of my competitors, Anna Gomez from France. And to be honest, it was a crazy picture. And however, the highlight, or, the bold statement was, "Oh, the scent of a woman."
Mm.
And it was like in a high crotch position or something of that effect. And it was like, okay, so that made me realize like people are just not used to this as much, this is something new. I was a little bit, ticked off about it, but at the same time, it's like, well, we're on the front page of the news, and so then, yeah. And then it was, we were on TV and like all these things that were new to us, and well, new to me especially, but new to the world of women's wrestling. So yeah, like, I think we felt like a lot of women felt we should have been in the 2000 Olympics. So like, we had to wait another 4 years. So people were definitely chomping at the bit, like wanting to get get in there, right? So people had stuck around before so they could have the opportunity, and they didn't retire, versus they were potentially going to retire before that time in hope that, it was in 2000. So they stuck around for additional 4 years, to have that like dream come true sort of thing. So.
Did you stay relatively healthy because you competed through 2012 and got medals, both the Olympics after? Were you able to just maintain your health?
I will say I'm so fortunate, like, and so blessed with in terms of, I've had injuries, but, it didn't really take me out for seasons. Like, I had one season there in 2010, my back was bad. So I still ended up competing at the World Championships, but had no lead up. I ended up going up a weight class to 59 kilos. And, I didn't have those major surgeries or anything that took me out for months and months. And so yeah, I had to change my training as I got older, and integrate some different types of training to sustain my body and keep it healthy. And kind of like that back injury made me realize if I want to continue to London, I've got to make some changes. And so yeah, like I'm very blessed with even now, I would say, like, in terms of my lingering wrestling injuries, if I stay on top of things and be balanced, it seems to be working out for me.
Well, along with health, you must have stayed motivated too to want to continue through 3 Olympic cycles. Were you motivated the entire time?
No, I would be lying. Definitely ups and downs, roller coaster. Questioned retiring probably half dozen times, but really thought of it in 2010, to be honest. And I just kind of changed my the way I looked at the sport, and I started, coaching more on the side and having a different lens. So I coached for like 4 years prior to my retirement, maybe even more, just at the university level, just helping with the team there. And it gave me a little burst of motivation, and knowing that that's something that I would want to be doing after I retired, and have a teaching background. So coaching made sense for me. So like that kind of helped me with just kind of give me a little spark. But also just like not looking too far down the road. We always try to look at our long-term goals and year ahead and such. But for me, it was just like really what was in front of me right then and right there, like being present. I hear some of the athletes talk about that now, and I think it's very important, especially during this time, right? It's so hard to look too far down the road. Being present, being right here, right now. And not claiming like this is what I have to do. This is what I'm going to do. Enjoying the sport for what it is, like every day, because that was my favorite part of being a wrestler, was the everyday work that I put in. It wasn't actually the major competitions. Those were nerve-wracking and very hard on you, but I loved doing the work. I love the preparation. Still do as a coach and such. I think being in the wrestling room, in a practice room, is just something that is so unique and unbelievable, because every day is different. You could go into a similar practice routine, you have the same structure plan or whatever as an athlete, and that practice will be different from the one that you had before in the similar structure, because you're up against people, you're up against yourself, essentially. So, you can have one good practice, and then it can turn and, not have such a great practice, and for so many different reasons and such. And it's constantly pushing you to reevaluate and to better yourself throughout it. So that's how I stayed motivated, I guess, because I loved I loved that aspect.
Well, taking that 2004 Olympics and using that headline you mentioned as a barometer, as we go back and just learning about the women's wrestling movement, those early world championships, instead of an outstanding wrestler award, they gave the most beautiful wrestler award. They gave kitchen appliances. And so you take
Yes.
that all the way to where we are now in the unique position you are. You take a hyper masculine sport, and now you're the head national team coach for the men's and women's. That's a big step. I don't know if it seems that way to you, but do you think people understand the scope of how far we've come and the position you're in?
I think every country is different, and it's there's still definitely room to grow and ensure that we are taking the right steps in the right direction for our sport, not just like gender specific. And so, yeah, I think that sometimes I am in my own little bubble in terms of just, doing my job and enjoying it and learning every day from it. And, but I do notice when I'm at the world stage, if I'm, in the men's, like the men's freestyle competition, I take a look around and there aren't any other female coaches that I've noticed that are, doing both. And I mean, both is just, that's just not even really something that would be practical for the most part, in terms of like the leadership, like that it's, you typically would have both, and we have in the past. It's something that we may move to, in terms of moving forward, and if funding and et cetera, like those type of things come into play. Like I would think that I do believe that having both is important. However, if I was to be just the men's coach, for instance, what would that look like? And that would be a huge step. And I think that it's still unfamiliar territory for a lot of countries, but I do think that as I've gone through this, my role and my position at the world level, people are starting to notice that that's like they expect me to be there, and it's just, or they notice that I'm there a little bit more, and or it not be so strange for them, if that makes sense. Because I think at times it was, even at like, especially at the lower age level, to be honest with you, at the cadet and junior, because those coaches don't necessarily know, my background. Whereas I find at the senior level, they do, because, it wasn't that long ago I was an athlete. So, I hope that, there's just that mutual respect amongst the group. And I do feel for the most part, I've met some great leaders and coaches throughout our sport on the men's side and the women's side. And hopefully as time goes, it's like those stepping stones, right? So, I mean, I enjoy what I do. Like I said, before, just chatting with you earlier, was I love the balance. I appreciate working with the men, and I appreciate working with the women. And so yeah, I'm very grateful for, just in terms of my coaching, how it can help elevate me as a coach, and help our program and wrestling all together.
How did this job come about? How did you get the dual role?
Just some structural changes within our positions for Wrestling Canada. And I think it was more to do with, me traveling with the team, and we do have a very strong women's program, and a lot of our program funding is towards the women and such. So, I think that's kind of where it was leading is what is doable for us as a program right here in during this time and in this quad. So yeah, to be honest, it kind of stumbled in 2000, and right after actually Rio. Yeah. So I was called international coach before too. So my role, or my change of title is now head coach, but for the most part, I'm doing this same thing. It's working with all the athletes in the freestyle divisions. Yeah.
Justina D'Estasio, who won a world title in 2018, had said that she appreciates having the women's perspective from you when she's had male coaches. But do you feel like there's some opposite to that as well, that some men are able to open up to you in a different way than they would a male coach?
It's an interesting question. I think with some, if they're needing that, and I think it's depends. Like every athlete's different. I think some can, let go a little bit more in terms of the conversation, where it leads. I'm a lot about the mental work that it takes to be a high performance athlete and to get to where you need to go. It's not just the physical battle and the technical elements of our sport day in, day out. It's a lot of the mental game. So I feel that is a lot of my conversations with the athletes too. Like you have, dig a little deeper, like figuring it, that self-awareness piece. So yeah, I think some men can be a little bit more open with me, but there are also other male coaches that have that same type of philosophy that, that they would gravitate to and be able to open to. So I think it's more about your personality, and I think it's a lot about your philosophy within the sport.
Do you show technique with both men and women in the same way, or do you have to adapt to each gender?
I would say similar. Yeah, just wrestling. I think some, you look at maybe the moves a little bit differently in terms of like body structure and flexibility and that sort of thing. But breaking down a high crotch or a single leg is no different in terms of for on a guy and on a girl. There's still all those technical elements that you have to break down, right? So I would say that it's similar.
How do you feel about the results? I mean, you've had some really good results in Canada. It has to feel good, the direction you're going, and to have a nice medal haul coming.
We have some work to do. We've had a tough year, I would say. And so, I believe in our coaches and our programs and our athletes that, good things will come in the next year. And with these changes, I think it's going to be helpful for us in terms of, the crop of athletes that we have. We still have a lot of young up and coming athletes. So, this is a lot of experience that they can draw from, and one more year to get better is positive.
When you accepted this job, this dual role, I know that executive director at USA Wrestling, Rich Bender, has tried to get you to be the women's developmental coach. Have you ever thought about doing that?
Oh, well, Rich is very persuasive. Great guy. And honestly, like, just have such a great friendship with the coaches in the US, like Terry and Clarissa, and just appreciate having that professional relationship and friendship, to be honest with you. And, I think that it's always important to keep your options open and just like knowing where you have to go to grow as a coach and as a person. So I definitely at the time was very curious about that role and yeah, and I think I continue to just still stay hungry as a coach, and where that leads me for the next quad, it's hard to know, right? It's these coaching positions are not easy to come by. I know that in the States, you guys are in a great space in terms of the university college program increasing for the women, and I think that's going to increase jobs and women in coaching, and coaching in general. So like for wrestling, so that's awesome. And that's positive. There are not a lot of jobs in Canada in terms of extras. So, I don't know what the future holds for me in terms of like, Paris 2024. Yeah. So like I'm dealing with what I have right now and enjoying my role here in Canada as head coach. And so we'll take it as it comes, but definitely always open to learning, developing myself pushing myself as a coach to be better.
Is there a good awareness of wrestling in Canada? Do you think that people understand it and respect what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, again, we kind of get stuck in our bubble a little bit, right? And you just kind of continue on and think that your world is the world, is the whole world. And it's definitely not in terms of, our culture and sport in Canada is very different than that in the States. And, but I know that we always get behind our Olympic athletes and sports, no matter what sport it is. Sometimes I got frustrated about that as an athlete because people would be paying attention to you on the when the Olympics came around, and but in between, not so much, and that used to frustrate me because those battles in between the quads are the hardest, to qualify, to get a world title, just the every season and your goals and what you want to accomplish. There's a lot there. And I think sometimes we miss that. We miss the in-between, and that's like social media is, it goes across the board. But it's about culture is really what it is. And so I think, our culture in hockey and even basketball now, it's becoming more increased, in Canada, and slowly we are incorporating more sports to really get behind and be excited about. Wrestling probably isn't one of them for the most part. So that's why I'm saying, like, we have a tight knit community for the most part in Canada. It's a small community. But yeah, it would be awesome if we could just increase the awareness piece a little bit more. And I know MMA got they came in and they have a big following. And to me, wrestling is a lot better than MMA. Oh, am I allowed to say that?
Sure. This is your time, Tonya.
But I understand, like, in terms of the spectator friendly piece, like, you have to, like, our sport is getting better, but we are all over the map when it comes to rules and changes and stuff like that. Like, we need to have that consistency. We need to have that, a good structure, good place of, like, good set of rules that are good for our sport, but also can be fun to watch. And I love to watch wrestling, but if you don't know the sport, it's hard. Like, I had my one friend who's like not a sport person really, and it was the dual meet against Iowa and Penn State, and I was watching on we got the Big Ten network here, so it was a Friday night. It was supposed to be our girls' night, and I was like, well, you're welcome to come over, but we're going to be watching a wrestling dual meet. And she's like, okay. So she had no clue. And this is, folks, so it's even different, right? So I'm not even 100% aware of the rules at times. Like, I'm always consistently asking questions about it. But yeah, it was so fun. And she actually enjoyed it. And so she had nothing to, like, does not know wrestling at all. And so I was like, hey, this is workable, just have to start with the, forcing people. Just kidding.
Well, one of my favorite photos Justin Hawk took, and it's of you at the World Championships, and you're holding up a clump of hair.
Oh, yes.
Go through that scene and what happened there.
Yeah, so Diana Weicker was wrestling, and I believe the the Belarusian, and she kept pulling the hair, and like she was known for it, still known for it. And to me, it was really obvious in the corner what she was doing. So I was trying to let the ref know, like, come on, pick up on this. And at one point, she grabbed her hair, a huge chunk of hair came out. Like, you don't see this too often. And it was just completely obvious that this was not a fluke. It was a deliberate action. So I was letting him know at half, this is what is going on. Like, here's the evidence. Pay attention, sort of thing. So it was just creating some awareness.
Well, another guy that has your role in Simon Fraser University, Justin Abdul, is the head coach there of the men's and women's. You got to tell me one good Justin Abdul story. You got anything for me?
Oh goodness, ones that I can say. Don't know about
Probably.
that. No, I'm kidding. Justin, we're great friends, and I'm great friends with his wife, Lindsay Abdu. We were teammates in 2004 Olympics. She was at the 48 kilo weight class, and we had some great fun. And Justin is great friends with my partner too. So we just have this like great friendship. He's a really funny, awesome guy. Exactly, keeps knows how to motivate, remembers every detail of every match, of not just himself, like all his teammates, all his friends through wrestling. Even like some of my matches, he would remember scores and stuff. And I'm like, how do you remember all of these details? And so the one thing that his wife and we always joke about when we get together, and we all get together and the boys are chit-chatting, and all their old wrestling boys and friends and coaches and whatever, and they start talking wrestling, and they go back and they start telling stories, and then you just keep hearing the same type of stories next time, and then the next time. And then we're like, ooh, that's a good tweak in that story, that sounds a lot better. So yeah, it's good fun. He's a great guy doing some great things at Simon Fraser, and looking forward to seeing what more comes of that program there. And love going out there to visit. It's like one of my favorite cities in Canada, for sure.